Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to welcome Steve Moore. Steve Moore is an award-winning author, licensed clinical professional counselor, and master's addictions counselor with over 25 years of clinical experience and more than 35 years of continuous sobriety. Steve is the founder of moresobriety.com, where he helps individuals heal emotional wounds, reduce shame, and build lasting recovery grounded in self-awareness, compassion, and personal responsibility. He is the author of 4 books exploring grief, addiction, shame, and family systems, and his work is shaped by both clinical practice and lived experience. At the core of his philosophy is a powerful belief: you can't go home until you've gone home, a reminder that unresolved childhood experiences often influence adult relationships, self-worth, and coping behaviors. In addition to his clinical work, Steve is also a songwriter who uses poetry and music as tools for healing childhood trauma, and he teaches clients how to access creativity as a pathway to emotional recovery. His songs can be found on his YouTube channel, Songs and Melodies Productions. A veteran-informed speaker and educator, Steve blends psychology, whole health recovery principles, and personal narrative to foster clarity, resilience, and sustainable personal growth. Please join me in welcoming Steve Moore. Steve, it's great to have you on the podcast today. I've been excited about our conversation since our pre-chat.
Well, thanks for having me, Dave. I'm excited to join you today. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and I think we got introduced, if I'm recalling correctly. I think John Emery might have introduced us.
That's correct.
And he connected us on Facebook and said, I really had to talk to Steve. And we had a great pre-chat. I know you're an addictions professional. I'm a retired addictions professional, so we had a lot to talk about in terms of our work with individuals who are struggling with substance use issues. And I'm glad we have the opportunity to record an episode together today.
Me too. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, my first question for you is tell our audience about the experiences that have shaped your life path and your life passions today.
Hey, that's a good question. My life path really wasn't something that I planned. It was something that I survived, and then I learned how to transform survival. I was born in Germany, and I spent the earliest part of my life, the first 18 months of my life, in an orphanage before being adopted by an American family, Army soldier and his German wife. And they brought me to the United States, and this was in the early 60s. And they kept me for approximately 5 years. And when I say they kept me for approximately 5 years, what I mean is Mr. M, as I'll call him, was called away to the Vietnam War because he was a helicopter pilot. So he left home for the Vietnam War, and that left just me and his wife, Mrs. M. And let's just say that we had a hard time together in the same room. The only thing I remember from her is childhood beatings with a metal curtain rod, and her constantly screaming, "Are you happy? Are you happy?" No, I'm not right now because you're beating me over the head with the curtain rod. One day in the late 1960s, I'm thinking it was about 1967-ish, he came into my bedroom and said, "Pack your bags, we're going to go on a trip." Boy, was I in for a surprise. I packed everything that I could into my suitcase because we were going away on a trip, and including a stuffed purple rabbit, a stuffed animal. I called him Peter Rabbit. Peter Rabbit was my friend. Peter Rabbit was my imaginary friend that I talked to. I still have Peter Rabbit. It's Peter Rabbit's the only thing that survived my childhood on my dresser in my bedroom. She proceeded to take me down to the Department of Social Services in where I was living at the time. And she told the social worker, I don't want him anymore. He's too much to handle. And back then, the adoption laws and the foster care system laws in the state of Virginia were such that you could do that. You can't do that anymore, thank goodness. So that was my first experience with abandonment. I basically was in the foster care system for approximately 9 months. And back then, in the city that I grew up in, Virginia, the foster care system did not have enough foster care parents, so there was nowhere to place me except at the local psychiatric hospital. Now, that's an appropriate placement for a child, don't you think?
Mm.
So imagine my surprise. And I remember being surrounded by psychiatric illness. There was everything from adults to children younger than me. They kept us segregated. I was actually in the lockup portion of that hospital. And that was my home for approximately 9 months. And then my second set of adoptive parents came in and made me a foster child first. And then about a year and a half after that, they adopted me. That's my name today, Steve Miller. Al and Georgetta Moore were the ones that adopted me. God rest their souls. But basically, early on, I learned life was unstable and that people don't stick around. And I was left with the feeling, what's wrong with me? I would even pray and ask God, as I understood God at that time, which wasn't very well. I was praying to an entity that I couldn't even see, touch, feel, hear. I just, through faith, even early on as a child, just believed that there was a power greater than me that started this whole thing that we call planet Earth and its inhabitants that had some sort of a master plan. I would pray and ask, what's wrong with me? Because nobody wants to keep me. The Moors kept me and raised me. Unfortunately, Dad was a combat disabled World War II veteran, serial alcoholic because of schizophrenia and post-traumatic stress disorder. Back then, they called it shell shock.
Yep.
My dad was part of the 172nd Infantry Division that charged the Philippine Island, Luzon, Philippine Islands. The Japanese at that time, is my understanding through the Army historian, had captured the overlook of the Pacific Basin. And it was the 172nd Infantry's division and mission to go up that mountain or hill and basically secure that for the Americans. There were, according to the Army historian, there were several thousand soldiers that ascended that hill. My dad was one of less than 2,000 that came back alive.
Wow.
And so to say that he had horrible flashbacks and PTSD would be the understatement of the century. But he drank heavily to cope. On my Songs and Melodies YouTube channel, I wrote a song that describes this whole situation very well, called My Childhood House. And I would invite the listeners to go listen to that, because I personally believe that is probably the best representation of me processing my childhood trauma. But anyway, I graduated high school. I went away to college at West Virginia University, and the drinking age in West Virginia was 18 years old. I was in because I was 18 years old. I was first introduced to alcohol at a church camp retreat when I was 14. I loved the feeling that alcohol gave me. It gave me a mellow, like, I don't care what you say or do to me right now because this stuff is making me feel really good, man, as alcohol and substance abuse will do. That's why I often refer to substance abuse as a big masquerade, because it's what it is. But anyway, so I was afforded the opportunity to go to West Virginia University on a full 4-year music scholarship because I was actually a pretty decent clarinet and saxophone player back then and vocalist. So I got my degree in performing arts. Basically, the 4 years I was at West Virginia University was a big drinking fest. we have a funny saying. We had a funny saying. They don't allow the people to say it much anymore, but it's funny. We used to say, "Welcome to West Virginia University, where excellence is learned and the couches are burned." West Virginia apparently had a reputation for when they won big football games, like against Penn State, say, as an example. They'd have a bonfire with old discarded couches in the middle of what they call Mountaineer Field pit, which was this big, sunken pit. Anyway, so my drinking what got me through college. The nice thing about alcohol when you're relatively young to it is it's a social lubricant. You're in. It helped me gain that I'm 10 foot tall and bulletproof feeling. I'm happy to report that that didn't include anger and bar fights, which is good. I was kind of like what I refer to as a quiet drunk. As a matter of fact, one band party that I recall in particular, I ended up going to sleep underneath the mobile home. I didn't even remember it. I'm pretty sure I blacked out. But anyway, my 4 years at WVU were a good education, but also mixed in with a lot of alcohol. And it was there, I think, that I really cemented the idea that alcoholism is my savior. And so I basically graduated from WVU, got tired of starving in audition lines because I found out really quick that good clarinet and good saxophone players were a dime a dozen out there. There's always people better than you, and there were. My dad had some friends in high places at Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company, and he proceeded to get me a job at Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company, which back then was a very difficult place to get a job. He knew one of the senior vice presidents he was friends with. And I went to work at Newport News Shipbuilding for almost 3 years. I was living at home, and I got tired of being around the domestic violence. I got tired of rescuing my mother, God rest her soul. So chose to join the Air Force in 1985 because I knew once I signed on the dotted line, I was Uncle Sam's property to want anything my mom could say or do about it. So I did. So from 1985 to 1989, I served in Uncle Sam's United States Air Force. I was a crew chief actually on the president's backup plane called Night Watch. It is a big jumbo 747 that's been retrofitted and redone. It's completely nuclear launch capable. And it's the flying White House, literally, in time of war. The last time it was used actually was on 9/11. That's the last time it was used actually as the flying White House with nuclear launch capability. Learned a lot there about how to closet my drinking habit. I was what I like to refer to as a responsible drunk. We knew our schedule a month ahead of time. So I pretty much knew the weekends, the long weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that I was going to be off, and I timed my drinking accordingly. I had difficulty, but I somehow managed to get through my time in the Air Force because perfection was the standard. Anything less than perfect, and you could have been drummed out of the Air Force. Because you think about it, a crew chief is an aviation maintenance inspector, and people's lives are at stake. I found that the United States Air Force gave me structure and purpose. I really needed that because I didn't really have any kind of structure at home. I became a counselor. I went back to school actually in 1993, University of Oklahoma. I had a program similar to University of Maryland's World Campus. They had a campus on every military base, and I was allowed to go back to graduate school and get my master's degree in counseling. So I graduated in 1998, even though I served in the military from 85 to 89. I went to school from 93 to 98. I didn't stop drinking until October 10th, 1990. And it was after my mother had passed away. She passed away in January of 1989. So I drank almost a full year beyond my mother's passing because that was the only coping skill I had. And it wasn't until my primary care doctor basically looked me in the eye and said, "You got two choices here, Moore. Live or die. Which one do you want?" And I looked at him puzzled, like, "What do you mean live or die?" He goes, "Your liver is not good." Like I was bordering on cirrhosis of the liver. I don't think it had advanced to that point, but I think and thinking back on it, I think he used that as a scare tactic. Well, thank you, Dr. Easterday. It worked because on October 10th, 1990, I checked myself into Midlands Community Hospital in Omaha, Nebraska. The rest, as they say, is history. I started off on a 35-year journey with sobriety. I started with the 12 steps. I started with a sponsor, and I started with a really good counselor at Family Services who himself had 20 years of experience. And my passion today is helping people understand basically that your past does not necessarily disqualify you, it prepares you for life. So my purpose with moresobriety.com, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more one later, is about turning survival into purpose. I was really tested on August 1st, 2024, when I lost my beloved soulmate and wife of 28 years. That's probably the closest I've come to relapse in the recent past. That one really hurt. I promised her on her deathbed, I promised her that I would remain clean and sober and that I was doing it for all the right reasons, because that's a piece of sobriety. You have to want it. I want sobriety like the air I breathe every day. That's how bad I want sobriety. I need it as just like the air that I breathe. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it, as the old country and western song said.
I've used that line myself. What I've shared my own story. First of all, congratulations on 35 years of continuous sobriety. As an addictions professional, one of the, I think, stigmas that I dealt with or clients dealt with was that you're an addict, you're always going to be an addict. Well, the reality is there's some individuals that do not recover from addiction, but there's many that do. And the other thing is you look at, and I'm sure, Steve, with your work that you do with substance users, it's also what happened in between. There's a lot of times that I've worked with clients who have had 5 to 10 years of continuous sobriety. They relapse because of a traumatic event in their lives. And then they would come into treatment experiencing a lot of shame and guilt. I just say, look, you have 5 to 10 years of sobriety, which is more than many have had. Let's build on the strengths that you had during that period of time, and let's address what happened. And when you mentioned that you almost relapsed again after your wife died, and my condolences too for the loss of your soulmate.
Thank you.
One of the things that I noticed in my work as an addictions professional is that severe stress was a tremendous relapse trigger for a lot of individuals who were using, whether it was a traumatic loss, a change in circumstances, living a life that was kind of not balanced, where they were doing too much work, not enough service work, not enough AA meeting attendance or 12-step meeting attendance. So the fact that you almost relapse is a good thing because you didn't relapse. And you're in a position now where you're doing obviously some great work with individuals who are requesting your services. So thank you for sharing your story. And the other thing is, for my audience, early experience matters. A lot of the individuals I've worked with, and I'm sure you've worked with, Steve, early childhood trauma, plus any history of addiction and coming from an unhealthy family system, all of those factors contribute to proliferating that cycle of addiction from generation to generation. So,
Absolutely. And it's been my experience that, first of all, it's been my experience, Dave, that one of the things that I'm trying to do is reframe that whole concept of relapse. Relapse is actually a learning opportunity. What I have my clients do is what I call backtrack in time. I have them mentally go back to the time of their relapse, and I ask them, what was going on around you environmentally? What was going on? Was your job stressing you out? Were you having a lot of fights with your partner? You having fights or disagreements with your daughters or sons? I asked them to go back in time because all these things are triggers, but they're also learning experiences. Because we learned to cope by picking up the bottle or shooting up. Because it gives you that, initially, it gives you that euphoric, like, wow, this is great, give me more feeling. But the problem with drug addiction is it turns on you. I also wrote and have another song loaded on my Songs and Melodies Productions YouTube page called My Name is Addiction. And in it, I talk about the cunning, baffling nature of addiction because it turns on you. It becomes your enemy. It's this masquerade that it just turns on you. And all the things that it used to do for you, it doesn't do it anymore. But I mean, that's one of the things that I try to do is reframe the whole concept of relapse into is not failure. And drug courts are famous for this, and probation officers are famous for this. And in Omaha, Nebraska, and Houston, Texas, I worked with both drug courts. They came at it from the mindset that relapse means you failed. No, they didn't fail. They just had a setback. Setbacks can be overcome.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, and I agree with that. I don't think there's any such thing. I mean, is failure, particularly when you're looking at the journey of somebody who's a substance user, certainly not a linear journey. There's going to be ups and downs. And I like the reframing of relapses as opportunities. They're opportunities to learn. And when I had a client that relapsed and would come back into treatment, we would take a look at that relapse and the steps leading up to it as an opportunity to learn, because then I could say, here's where I went wrong. And I think relapse doesn't begin when you pick up the drink. It picks up long before the drink, because you return back to the behaviors that attributed to your drinking anyway. So if we can look at, let's take a look at what happened. Look at it as an opportunity. Let's take what we learned, apply it to this go around, and let's see if we can get you back on the road to permanent and continuous sobriety.
Yeah. And one of the things that I work with that I've come to find out is a characteristic feature of relapse is core belief or core messages. Okay. Most of us that grow up in a dysfunctional household are loaded with them. Let me just give you an example. Every time my father would get liquored up, he used to love pointing at me and going, "You worthless effing bastard. I wish we'd never adopted you. You're never going to amount to anything." Now, what core beliefs do you think that ingrained in the neural network up here in my brain? I'm unlovable. I'm never going to amount to anything. I'm worthless. All that negativity got just soldered into the motherboard in my brain, because our brain is like a computer motherboard. The memory chip houses everything. And the problem with breaking and addiction is garbage in, but garbage got no place to go. We have to learn new coping skills to extract. One of the things that I work with clients on is what I call the stop sign method that my therapist taught me. Like every time one of Dad's quotes comes to mind, which I'm happy to report doesn't happen very often, but so when it does, I immediately picture the stop sign to stop. You no longer have power and control over me. And as a matter of fact, as the owner of this property, I evicted you. Remember? Get out. I'm lovable. I'm worthwhile. I'm kind. I'm compassionate. I'm empathetic. And I go down what I call my gratitude list. And speaking of gratitude lists, that is another recovery tool that I work with clients on developing, because if it weren't for my gratitude toolbox, oh my goodness. Because gratitude is an attitude, as they say in the 12 steps. If you focus more on the things that you have to be grateful for, as opposed to the things that you think maybe you aren't so grateful for, you're going to find that recovery becomes a little bit easier. I mean, recovery is never easy. I'm not going to lie to anybody and say, oh yeah, it's a piece of cake. It hasn't been. It's been filled with challenges over the years. But
anything we do in life is going to be filled with challenges. That's not going to be an easy peasy road. But you mentioned the message that your father gave you when he was liquored up, that you were unlovable, that you weren't going to amount to anything. This reminded me of an interaction that I had with a client, Steve. He was a scapegoat in the family. He identified himself as a scapegoat in the family.
I was too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the
there's
black
always, yeah, the black sheep, and those roles can become interchangeable depending on who manages to move out of the family system. But this gave probably, I say mid-40s, this guy was, and he goes, I kept hearing every day of my life that I was going to be a total screw up. So you know what I just determined to do? I determined to show my family that I could be the best damn screw up ever. And he did. He got involved in a variety of criminal activities. He went through numerous relationships. He even sabotaged any relationships that were going well, because the addiction and the chaos of the addictive lifestyle was all he knew. But he resolved himself, Steve, that he goes, I'm going to be the best damn screw up you ever saw. And that was, again, because of what was planted in his head. That
Yep.
neural pathway that was created was a neural pathway of saying, I'm never going to amount to anything.
And speaking of neuro pathway, I highly recommend this. I am not certified in it, but find yourself a therapist that is certified in a technique called neuro-linguistic programming. I like to call it light hypnosis 101. Because basically what neuro-linguistic programming is, it basically gets you and your mind and body in a relaxed state. You're fed positive messages to replace the negative ones that are deeply embedded. I can't say enough good things about neuro-linguistic programming, and I found it really helped me. It doesn't totally take the messages away, but it makes it so that the powerful messages, the positive messages, overpower the negative ones. So,
Yeah, I could see that working real well with cognitive behavioral therapy, which is an evidence-based therapy that has proven to work very well with individuals with substance use issues, with depression, and typically those two can go hand in hand too. So you mentioned moresobriety.com. I know you've mentioned the mission, you've mentioned some of the tools you offer, like the gratitude list and the stop method. Is there anything else, any other strategies that you would like to share that you think would be helpful for our audience to understand?
the mission of More Sobriety for me was to teach people how to rewrite their story, because the biggest piece of recovery, long-term recovery, is reprogramming those core beliefs that you've developed. I always work with clients and have them, first of all, identify what those core beliefs are. I'm unworthy. I'm unlovable. I'll never amount to anything. Oh, imposter syndrome. Oh, God, once they figure out the real me, I'm going to get fired. That kind, whatever it is. Then I have them identify the voice itself. Like, I want you to tune in and I want you to listen to the vocal quality. 9 times out of 10, it was someone who had power, influence, and control over them when they were younger. They were growing up. And I've worked with schizophrenics over the years, and the ones that I've been able to get to do that, it has helped them quiet the voices in their head. I don't think the voices ever go away, but between that and medication, a lot of them came back later to tell me that they were glad that they were able to at least identify what it was they were hearing. So that's important. And what I do with moresobriety.com is basically I combine my 35 years of sobriety and my experience with my 25 years of counseling experience. I've worked with different people suffering from a variety of mental health disorders. I'll be honest with you, I personally don't like the labeling system that exists in mental health. We can thank our insurance industry for that.
All right. And just to interrupt you, I as a therapist, I do dislike more and more the labeling piece of the DSM-5 in the mental health system as my career grew more to a close. And the guests that I've had on my podcast, interestingly, there's been a pattern where they just go away from labeling, because labelings can be limiting. And in the case of addiction, they can be more stigmatizing.
And Dave, I've found that it reinforces that label reinforces the belief.
Yeah.
Going back to your gentleman, well, I'm going to be the best screw up there is. Okay. That was his core belief. I'm going to be the best screw up there is. And he found ways to make that come true. And that's what we do, whether we realize it or not. And that's the other piece of moresobriety.com is I try to get people to focus on the root cause of addiction, which is your negative core beliefs. I have a saying in my practice that I love, and you mentioned it earlier, but I'm going to mention it again. You can't go home physically until you've gone home mentally.
Yeah.
Okay? And there's a lot of power in that. As a matter of fact, Miranda Lambert sang a very popular country western song years ago called The House That Built Me. I have written a song since based on my childhood house called My Childhood House. There's a lot of pain and a lot of dysfunction in a lot of people's houses. I didn't grow up in a made-for-TV family like the Brady Bunch, the Cosby Show, those kinds of programs. I grew up in the real world, as I like to say, where I had an alcoholic for an adoptive father, and I basically had an enabler for a mother. I loved them both dearly, because I kept reminding myself, even in spite of the pain, they gave you a home and a sense of permanence. Nobody ever said it was going to be a garden bed of roses. There's going to be some thorns in there too. But I get people to focus on grief and loss issues, trauma, shame, family of origin issues. All of it plays a part in who we are today and how we manage stress, how we handle relationships.
Yeah, and I think all of those are very key. And for me, Steve, one of the things I found in the last few years of my practice is that there was a lot of disenfranchised and delayed grief among individuals who are addicted. If
Yeah,
if a person who is addicted lost another fellow addict, the attitude could be, well, it's just another addict. He wasn't any use to society anyway, so it's no great loss. So what I've had individuals tell me is that they learned very quickly that they couldn't express their loss safely. And a lot of times those unexpressed issues of loss and other types of trauma contributed to relapse. And that's one of the things that I noticed was unresolved grief, among other things, was very prominent in terms of contributing to relapse with individuals who had substance use issues.
absolutely. Yeah.
So,
My own grief and loss, Dave, almost caused me to relapse back in August 1st, 2024, because my wife and I, we were soulmates. As a matter of fact, we talked about that on our first date because we just had that intuition, like, I've been with you before. I couldn't explain it. And again, that's for another podcast. But when you lose someone that's that connected to you, that sends your whole world spiraling. And to say that I was in a numbed mental haze for the first year after her death would probably be the understatement of the century. They call it widower's fog in the grief and loss counseling industry. But yeah, that one almost got me. But basically, one of the things that AA taught me and the military is there is power in fellowship and numbers. One of the things that I highly recommend to people that are new even to recovery is you don't want to try and do this by yourself, because that's been the problem up to this point. You've been doing this. You've been trying to manage this by yourself. You've been telling yourself the big lie. I can handle this. No, you can't. Because if you could, you'd be in a better situation than what you are.
yeah, well, no person is an island. We need the help of others to get us through some really tragic times and traumatic times. We need that sense of community, whether the individual is a substance user, whether the individual's experienced loss. The power of community is important, in addition to other things, in helping individuals transcend their worst tragedies. So, you've written 4 books, but the book I wanted to ask you about was 34 Years Sober. Now it's 35 Years Sober. So you're going to have to change the title at some point, Steve,
I'll do a rewrite.
Have like one of those things where people can just like turn the page after October 10th. And so it's like they could flip to like 35, 37. But anyway, I digress. But tell us about your book. What do you want readers to take away from it?
That long-term sobriety isn't just possible, it's sustainable. That's probably the biggest takeaway. And I basically wanted to move beyond one of the reasons why my book title is so long, what the 12 steps don't tell you. I got to cheat and look at my own book cover here. What the 12 steps don't tell you about how to achieve and maintain long-term sobriety. There's a lot of things that the 12 steps don't tell us. There are people in AA meetings all over the world that have 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, some have over 30, some have over 40 years, but nobody's talking about how did you get there? And that's one of the things I wanted to open the door for. I'm hopeful that if someone reads my book that's in long-term recovery, they might write a book and say, these are some of the things that I've done to maintain long-term sobriety. My book explores the deeper issues like grief, shame, trauma, and identity, because addiction is often a response to something underneath the surface. It's a response to that core belief system that we all are walking around with in our brain. And the way I explain core belief to my clients that I work with is I have them imagine that they're on their way to catch an airplane and you see those rolling suitcases that are known as carry-on baggage. Well,
Mhm.
think of it as that's my emotional baggage from my childhood, and we drag it with us throughout our lifetime. Unless we figure out a way to permanently check the bag. And that's what I'm hopeful that 34 years sober will allow people to do, is to reframe their relapse. Okay. I'm not a failure because I relapsed, or I'm not a failure because I have to admit that I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict, but I am confident, I'm capable, I'm lovable. I'm, again, teach them how to develop a gratitude list that they can continually refer back and forth to. The secondary message in my book is you're not broken. Okay. You're carrying things that were never meant for you to carry. That's where your higher power comes in. The book is not about addiction so much as it's about transformation. The real work actually begins after you decide to stop drinking or using.
Mhm.
That's where the real work begins.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly with that. And sometimes and this is why a lot of times for individuals who are in early recovery, relapse is also a concern because they're doing the early work and they're taking a deep dive into themselves, and they'll learn lots of parts of themselves that aren't pretty. And then they have to look at that and resurface that.
And it's painful. It's painful
Yeah.
work. Children who grow up in dysfunctional households, or alcoholic households, or drug abusing households learn. And I'm borrowing from Claudia Black, who's a well-known clinician social worker, and she's been around the circuit for 40 plus years. But I think it was Claudia Black that said that the biggest law or rule that we learn as survivors of substance use households is don't talk, don't trust, and don't feel. For God's sake, don't keep all that touchy-feely stuff out of my house, because active addicts, they don't want to deal with feelings. And when you first start opening that can of worms, it's painful. I remember the first time I cried from bellows of my gut. And I remember how relieved I felt because I finally felt something without having to use alcohol to push me there.
Yep.
I could cry when I was under the influence. I did it away from everybody else because I didn't want anybody to know that or accuse me of not being a man. But I'm here to tell you, men cry too.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, men feel as intensely as women do. We just may deal with it differently, but we still have the same intensity.
yeah, it kind of reminds me that reminds me of a funny counseling family or couples counseling session that I did years ago. They came in to talk to me because they had been arguing a lot. The honeymoon period was over, to quote the wife. And after talking with them separately and together, I eventually told them the story of folding the laundry in my married life. I said, a lot of times what we fight about isn't actually the issue. The issue is I was taught to do it this way, you were taught to do it this way. And a lot of times the woman or the man or both are busy arguing about who's right, who's right. So I proceeded to tell him the following story. And that was my wife she worked labor and delivery. She was a labor and delivery nurse when we were first married. She had just come off a 12-hour shift. And my mom taught me how to do laundry. She taught me how to do some basic cooking skills. She taught me things that would help me survive in my marriage, so to speak. I did the laundry and folded the laundry, put it away. My wife comes home and goes by the laundry room, and she stops dead in her tracks. And she turns around and she looks at me and she goes, "You didn't fold those towels correctly." And I looked at her and said, "What?" She said, "You didn't fold the towels correctly." And I said, "Says who? What do you mean?" I went, "Okay, hold on a second. Time out, baby. What went on at your office today? Because this is obviously not about how I folded the towels or didn't fold the towels." Come to find out, he was upset because a baby died on her shift.
Yeah.
She was caring for the mom and the baby. And that really upset her. And once we got down to it, basically that issue was like, went away. but she was using the folded towels basically to start venting her anger and her frustration. And this is where core belief comes in too. It's like we're raised to do things a certain way, and then that becomes the only way that something can be done. Well, that can become problematic if you're a drug addict or an alcoholic, because that's what fuels the rigid, or what we call a stinking thinking.
Yep. Yeah, I remember stinking thinking. That was a term that was used quite often, in the place that I worked and with my clients as well.
They like it.
Yeah, they do.
It's very true.
And it's very catchy, and it's very easy that's something, a catchphrase that they can go back to when they are engaging in thinking that's going to contribute to relapse. They can just revert to that phrase.
Mhm.
From your experience, what's the difference between individuals who attain permanent sobriety and those that continually relapse?
Well, the difference isn't willpower. It's a willingness to face the issue. That is how I would summarize it, because a lot of people mistakenly think that stopping using a substance is all about willpower. You just got to want it. Well, that's a piece of it, okay? But you have to have that willingness, or develop that willingness, to face the issues surrounding your substance use. It really goes beyond stoppage. And as we've already talked about, it needs to address core issues like grief, loss, abandonment, PTSD, shame, identity issues. The sky's the limit. And you need to replace that core belief system with honesty and structure and a support system and ability basically to sit down and discover what was the catalyst, or what was the contributing factor to my substance use or abuse. What's causing this? Why can't I stop? Why am I having difficulty stopping? Why do I keep relapsing? We use substances, drugs and alcohol, to escape mentally from what we don't want to face, what we're not ready to face. And that's why relapse happens, quite frankly. What I encourage my clients to do is to stay focused on the surface feelings and emotions, and not revert back to their old ways of coping, which was picking up the bottle or shooting up.
It's going back to root causes, changing core belief systems. And, I would agree. I think anytime I had individuals with multiple relapse histories, I would say to them, okay, look, I know what you got the first few times you were in treatment. Let's talk about what you didn't get, and let's take a look about what core beliefs you're still hanging on to that's contributing to relapse after a period of continuous sobriety. So,
Yeah.
I know you use songwriting and poetry and music as tools to express your own journey and express your own feelings.
Mm-hmm.
How do they and other forms of creativity, healing, sobriety, with the individuals that you work with? I've worked with a lot of individuals with addiction who are musicians, who had musical skills, who were good writers. So I just wanted to say that before I turn the floor back over to you. So
Creativity reaches a place in our soul that regular conversation like we're having can't. Trauma is stored in our emotions. It's not stored in our words, plain and simple. By encouraging people to write poetry or create a song, and it helps people bypass those defense mechanisms that they've built up and actually connect with their inner truth or their emotions, probably for the first time. It also helps people organize their thoughts and their emotions. It creates kind of a rhythm, if you will, out of all the chaos that they grew up with. And I found that it reduces shame. It basically transforms pain. It helps people move from silence to voice. It helps them move from confusion over to clarity. And it helps them move from survival to rewriting their own story. Those are probably the key features that I would say creativity and music does. I first got actually turned on with the idea of incorporating or helping clients incorporate songwriting and creativity when I was a therapist at the Harris Center for Mental Health and IDD in Houston. And I worked as part of the New Start program, which basically was an exclusive program that worked for Texas Department of Corrections parolees. And one of the ways that I found it was easiest to get to them was to have them write a rap song about what it was they were feeling. The stuff that came out during those groups and those therapy sessions was just remarkable. And I actually had a couple of parolees come back later after they completed our program and thanked me for having them do that, because they're like, that's how I express myself. That's how I feel like I'm being heard and that I might be heard by others.
And you look at some of the musicians that have struggled with their own challenges, they wear their heart on their sleeve through their music, through their lyrics. And for somebody who's struggling, that in and of itself can be cathartic, because you have somebody now that you can identify with without necessarily emotionally investing in that person, but emotionally invested in the content of the music or the poem or the written blog that they've created. So,
I'll give you a great example. I love Jelly Roll.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, the power in that man's songs, and oh my goodness. Sometimes it even drives me to tears listening to it, but there's just a lot of emotion that comes through in the expression of music.
And like you said, it helps us get in touch with our own emotions. It helps us learn how to feel again. And it helps us understand that feelings are not the enemy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I found this question on your Facebook page, and I know you would ask this question of your Facebook followers, your friends. There's the question: if God had a chat with his angels, what would they say about me? So, Steve, I'm going to replace the me with you. So if God had a chat with his angels, what would they say about you?
I don't think God would talk about me in terms of perfection. I really think he would talk to me about persistence and resilience. I think he might say something like, that's one of mine who fell, but he kept getting back up. It kind of reminds me of an old Rocky Balboa quote, and I'm paraphrasing this, but in one of his movies, Rocky Balboa, he turns to his son and he says, it ain't about how hard you get hit. It's about how you get back up and keep fighting. And I think that God saying that I've certainly demonstrated my resilience over the years. He talked about the child from long ago that struggled with belonging, with struggling with feeling like he had a purpose or he had a meaning to me. He would talk about to his angel, he struggled with and lost his way from us through addiction, but he didn't stay there. He found his way back. And I also think he probably would say something like, Steve took his pain and he turned it into purpose. So, like, for much of my life, Dave, I felt abandoned, discarded, and even spiritually bankrupt at times. I would oftentimes, as a youngster, question, why am I praying to somebody or something that I can't see, I can't feel, I can't touch, I can't hear? Basically, I'm sensory deprived when I talk to God. At least that's how I felt at the time. And that's why early on in the 12 steps, the concept of higher power was a very difficult hurdle for me to hurdle, because I'm too busy being angry with God. And I think that's the other thing that God would say is he understood that it was okay to be angry with me. He had to express that, and he had to get through that in order to come back home spiritually.
Yeah.
I would consider myself spiritual and not religious. There's a big difference between those two words. I learned that spirituality is something that surrounds your relationship with God or your higher power greater than you, whereas religion is man-made. It contains rules and regulations. We call it dogma, and that's the primary difference between the two. And people oftentimes in recovery, initially anyway, don't respond well to religion. And they don't respond well to the concept of higher power because they feel like we're trying to push religion on them. And that's certainly not true at all. I certainly think that God would talk about my accomplishments since becoming clean and sober. And then he would point to my willingness to keep going, to keep growing, and to keep serving. He basically summarized me, I think, as saying, more, you're not perfect, but you're willing.
Yeah, you're willing, you're teachable, and you have a passion for service because of your own challenges. And that's what it's all about.
Yes, sir.
Well,
Absolutely.
thank
Sorry,
you.
sir, old military habits to my mark.
Hey, it takes a lot to offend me, so don't worry about it. We're good.
You're
We're
good.
good.
That's
So, Steve, you've left us with a lot of good stuff today. I mean, it's just really a lot of good tools that individuals who may be struggling with their own substance use issues or struggling with other challenges in their life can implement. But I'm going to ask you to dig once more into your reservoir of wisdom and give us one ultimate takeaway that you want our audience to understand today.
Well, if I could rerun the listening audience for one thing, if you leave with anything at all, it's this. You are not broken. Whatever you've been through, okay? You're not broken. All right? Addiction, you've been through loss, you've been through trauma, you've been through developing this tape system in your head, basically of core beliefs that you've got to work through. But all of that has actually shaped you into who you are, but it does not define you. There's a big difference between those two words. Okay. And I spent a lot of my life believing that something was wrong with me, that I was inherently flawed, that I would never amount to anything, dealing with imposter syndrome, as a matter of fact, stage fright when I was in the music business. Once I faced those issues, things began to change. Wherever the listeners are today, when they're listening to this, I want them to take away that change is possible, healing is possible, and your story is far from being over, okay? You need to continue your story. Always, I'm going to quote William Shakespeare on this, but to thine own self be true. So, and I've tried to live my sober life with that in the back of my mind, to thine own self be true.
And those are good words to live by.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, my last question for you is if people want to contact you, contract for your services, purchase your books, find out more about your songwriting and poetry, it's the best way for them to do that.
It'd be more, MOORE, sobriety.com. That's my website. And then also I have an email address, moresobriety@gmail.com.
All right.
Quickest ways to get a hold of me.
I will make sure that I put the links to your contact information in the episode notes when we go live. So, Steve, with that, thank you so much for just a wonderful conversation today. I enjoyed speaking with you, and hopefully we can have future conversations again.
Well, I appreciate you having me, Dave, and I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, but it's always nice talking to a fellow counselor and someone that's been in business, if you will, of substance abuse and helping people. Because although we have the same objective, I think we may approach it a little differently. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate the opportunity to come on the podcast today and talk to your listeners about who I am and what my life experience has been and where I'm hopefully going.
You're welcome, Steve. And with that, that's a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.